Thanks for coming to my talk, How Music Enhances Virtual Presence. Now, before we begin, please, everyone, if you could set your phones on silent, that would be great. I'm going to be doing a Q&A after this talk, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to step up to the microphone, and don't forget to introduce yourselves. Also, I'll be taking more questions after this talk in wrap-up room 3024, so please feel free to follow me there. Also, please remember to fill out those session evaluation emails. They're going to be popping into your inboxes after the talk concludes. GDC folks love attendee feedback. All right, so is everybody ready? Then let's get started. My name is Winifred Phillips. I've composed music for lots of games on lots of different platforms, and my body of work includes the music for games in 5 well-known franchises: Assassin's Creed, Total War, Little Big Planet, The Sims, and God of War. You might also know me if you've read my book, A Composer's Guide to Game Music, published by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Press. Over the past couple of years, a lot of development studios have hired me to create music for virtual reality games. And it's fascinating work. Gaming in virtual reality involves an engulfing 360-degree spherical environment and a sense of physical agency just never before possible in traditional gaming. Players in VR have the opportunity to feel bodily present inside the virtual world. Now, this sense of virtual presence offers an amazing opportunity for development teams to create powerful gaming experiences. During this presentation, we'll explore what virtual presence is. Next, we'll take a look at some creative composition strategies we can use to help induce virtual presence. And finally, we'll discuss some of the possible drawbacks of virtual presence and what we game composers can do to keep the fun going for players during their adventures in VR. Over the course of this talk, I'll be showing examples from several of my VR projects over the past year. I hope you'll find these creative composition strategies to be useful for your own projects. And please keep in mind that while all of these ideas are primarily designed to make gaming in VR more fun, they are essentially meant to get players more viscerally involved in any sort of gameplay. So they will work for traditional game projects too. They'll just be more psychologically potent for gamers in VR. All right, now let's start with the basics. What is virtual presence? According to Professor Thomas B. Sheridan of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, virtual presence is defined as the sensation of being present in the environment generated by the computer. Now, in order to feel virtually present, we have to accept the in-game location as a tangible space. According to Professor Sheridan, there are lots of methods that VR designers can use to accentuate the reality of their virtual environments. They can shower players with sensory stimuli. They can encourage players to move about, changing their relative viewpoint, altering their binaural soundscape. They can place objects within the environment that can be manipulated and changed by players. Now, this leads to a greater sense of material engagement. Here's an example from one of my recent projects, The Haunted Graveyard, from developers HoloSpark. Now, as a Halloween-inspired VR experience designed to be accessible to a large audience in VR arcades, The Haunted Graveyard provides an involving atmospheric landscape for players to explore. Now, virtual presence is extremely important, so the game provides the necessary sensory stimuli, player movement, and usable objects, such as Professor Sheridan described. However, the game also includes lots of music to keep players emotionally stimulated. So let's take a look at that. Now, as you saw, music in The Haunted Graveyard works constantly to keep players emotionally invested in the experience. In order for true virtual presence to be attained, players have to let go of their natural incredulity and just get emotionally involved. They have to forget about the fact that they're in VR and just live the adventure. Now, as you saw from the gameplay video, the music in The Haunted Graveyard is an important part of the game's overall design. Music can be inspiring. It can make you feel more committed to what you're doing and more invested in the world around you. Now, the question is, how does music enable virtual presence? And what strategies can game composers use to make that happen? In this talk, we're going to explore 3 mechanisms wherein music helps to enable virtual presence. Music empowers flow, music promotes psychological attachment, and music provides an avenue for mood attenuation. So let's start with the first mechanism on our list, the theory of flow. First introduced in the book, Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Experience, the theory of flow tries to explain what it means when we get so absorbed in some interesting task that we just forget about everything else. All distractions fall away, and our minds sharpen to a laser point of focus. Now, sometimes this is called being in the zone. The feeling, well, it's an incredible rush. Moreover, it's a useful tool when we're trying to instill a sensation of virtual presence in our players. In a study published in the journal Computers and Human Behavior, researchers from Indiana University found that the flow phenomenon, when experienced in a virtual world, can enable and enhance the sensation of virtual presence. In other words, when we're feeling in the zone in VR, we also tend to feel like we're actually existing inside the virtual world. Now, with that in mind, how can we game composers use this phenomenon to our advantage? Well, science has shown us that music has a direct correlation with the flow state. In an experiment conducted at Brunel University, researchers studied athletes who listened to music during their exercise routines. The researchers found that music had a direct, strong, and beneficial effect on the athlete's flow state, helping them to get in the zone. Now, here's an example. One of my most recent projects was the main theme music for AudioShield. It's a music rhythm game for VR from developers AudioSurf. Using a shield in each hand, players block glowing orbs that are flying towards them in synchronization with the music. The game analyzes the unique qualities of the music to determine the type and frequency of orbs coming towards the player. Now, because of this, composing music for AudioShield was a real trial and error process. All during music production, the game designer and I would load music into the game, we'd play through it, looking for any orb activity that felt, well, jarring or choppy or rough, anything that would interrupt flow. Now, I'd go back into the music studio, I'd make changes, we'd load the music back into the game, and we'd play through it again. Were the orbs showing up in ways that were too surprising or, well, not surprising enough? We were looking for that sweet spot when flow would grab hold, when the player would be firmly in the zone. And when that happened, it just felt like everything came together. The gameplay was fun, the music was driving, and you really felt like you were actually there. Everything felt tangible and real. Flow and virtual presence kicked in together. Now, here's a video showing how gameplay worked during the main theme of AudioShield. As we could see in that video, the AudioShield game used the rhythms and sound frequencies of that music to determine how many orbs were coming towards the player and how fast they came. Composing the music to maximize this system allowed the music to get players in the zone, increasing the chances they'd actually experience the flow state. And the flow state is a powerful tool when we're trying to support virtual presence in VR gaming. So now let's look at the second mechanism by which music enables virtual presence. Psychological attachment. In a paper presented in the Computer-Human Interaction Conference, a research team from Carnegie Mellon defined virtual presence as the extent to which a person's cognitive and perceptual systems are tricked into believing they're somewhere other than their physical location. Now, this assertion formed the jumping-off point for 2 researchers from University College London, who set out to define what specific circumstances could lead to virtual presence in gaming. They developed a model for how gamers developed the psychological attachment necessary to achieve virtual presence. Their model consists of 3 distinct stages: engagement, engrossment, and empathy. So let's start with the first stage. We can define engagement as the commitment of the player to remain focused on the game. Note that this is all about energy and attention. It's not about emotion. Engagement is a motivational tool. Now, since music has long been used to motivate people, it makes sense to use music as a tool to attain engagement. This becomes especially important when we're striving for virtual presence. So let's take a look at an example from one of my VR projects. In Shattered State, players are thrown into the job of the director of the National Intelligence Agency during a crisis situation involving terrorists, bomb threats, and a possible military coup. Developed by Supermassive Games, the Shattered State VR game forces players to make quick decisions with profound repercussions, and then watch the results of those actions. It was important for players to remain committed to this story, so the audio lead at Supermassive Games and I developed an interactive music system that scaled in energy and intensity as the stakes grew higher. Now, during gameplay in Shattered State, the music system featured abrupt changes to draw the player's attention to the in-game decision-making menu, hold their attention while they were making those decisions, and also while the results of the decisions played out before them. Now, the thrust of the system was all about motivation, not about emotional reaction, and I composed the music to emphasize shifts in energy. So let's take a look at how that worked. Notice how the music adjusts when the player makes a significant choice.
You've got civilians right behind it.
What's your exposed here? We're trying to hold a position.
Now, as we saw, the music system of Shattered State would abruptly shift to arrest the player's attention to the in-game decision-making menu and then keep the player focused during the consequences of those actions. I composed the music to emphasize shifts in energy that would help players remain intellectually engaged. All right, so now we've considered engagement. So now let's move on to the second of the 3 stages of psychological attachment, engrossment. Now, engrossment goes beyond simple motivation or focus. When players are engrossed, they reach this state because, according to the researchers from University College London, game features combine in such a way that the gamer's emotions are directly affected by the game. Now, the researchers cite various game characteristics that can achieve this, including the visuals, the tasks, and the plot. Now, music has the ability to directly affect all 3 of these characteristics. For the visual aspects of a game, music not only influences what we see, but also how much we see. At the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, a study showed that the overall mood of music can influence what visuals we perceive while we're listening to it. Now, happy music causes us to see pleasant details, while sad music brings more grim sights to our attention. In regards to tasks, music has long been known to make tasks more rewarding and enjoyable. A study at the University of Windsor showed that listening to music while working not only increases our enjoyment of that work, but it also increases the quality of that work as well. And finally, music can intensify our appreciation for and our understanding of plot. Researchers in Germany conducted a really interesting study that paired drastically different musical scores with the same short film to see if study subjects would be influenced by the music to interpret the plot of the film in different ways. They concluded that when the music was altered, the interpretation of the plot was dramatically altered as well, even though the events of the short film had remained unchanged. Now, the common thread here is that players really need to feel a sense of emotional connection to visuals, to tasks, and to plot. When we're trying to stimulate player engrossment, we're specifically reaching out to their emotions. Now, music is well known for enhancing the inherent emotional undercurrent of any given situation, but I'd like to direct our attention now to a specific example in which music is used to introduce emotional states to situations where the mood might be otherwise somewhat undefined. One of my most recent projects is the Life Hutch VR game, currently in development by the team at Next Stop Willoughby and based on the short story written by world-renowned science fiction author Harlan Ellison. Life Hutch VR is an outer space saga with a weird, surreal quality. Many of the events in the game convey layers of elusive double meaning, without any context with which we can interpret that strangeness. Now, this is actually part of what makes Life Hutch so compelling. Now, my job as the composer for this project was to project an undercurrent of raw emotion into this mix, to make events feel strange or disquieting, even when objective circumstances didn't really even seem to warrant these feelings. The goal was to stir up disconcerting emotional states. Now, here's a gameplay sequence in which the player is tasked with rapidly crossing a hostile planet's surface with steaming rock and lava flows. Rather than conveying the objective momentum of urgency and risk, the music expresses subjective, unsettling emotions instead.
You may need your boosters to clear these obstacles, Captain.
Okay, Angel.
So as we can see, players really need to feel a deep sense of emotional connection in order to experience virtual presence. And in LifeHutch VR, the music sought to keep players emotionally engrossed by challenging them with unexpected moods, such as the slow and uneasy music we just heard beneath an anxious trek across a hostile planet's surface. By keeping players on edge, the musical score sought to stir up the strong emotions that could help players feel a more potent sensation of virtual presence. Now, engrossment is the second of the 3 stages of psychological attachment, so let's move on to the third and final stage, empathy. We all know when we feel empathy, we're feeling compassion towards other people. However, according to the researchers from University College London, when we've achieved empathy as a component of virtual presence, we're not feeling compassion for other characters, but rather for ourselves. As the main character in our own virtual adventure, we feel empathy for our own in-game situation and for the character that we currently inhabit. Now, once we've achieved this fullest expression of personal empathy, we've reached the final stage that enables virtual presence. Now, as game composers, how can we help players achieve this specific form of personal empathy? Well, science can trigger and stoke this emotion very effectively, and in some tried and true ways. We actually just have to get players to root for themselves. We have to build them up, make them feel emotionally invested in their own success. So let's check out a couple of simple but very effective examples. First, let's take a look at Fail Factory. This was developed by Armature Studio and just released for the Oculus Go this past December. In Fail Factory, players assume high-stress jobs in a gigantic robot factory. Keeping up with the rapidly accelerating conveyor belts and assembly lines forms a constant challenge, resulting in a lot of wacky failures. Now, while the pandemonium is a big part of the game's overall appeal, it was still important to keep players motivated to succeed. Players need to empathize with their own character's accomplishments, since this kind of emotional investment enhances virtual presence. As composers, one way we can uplift player confidence is by musically reinforcing moments of success. In Fail Factory, I encouraged players to cheer themselves on by composing some overtly confident music during those times in which they receive their gameplay results and view their scores. Now, while the music still conveys the silliness that is inherent in all the rest of the music I composed for Fail Factory, the music I composed for the gameplay results sequences was designed to really emphasize confidence and swagger. So let's see what that was like. So as you can see, this confident music from Fail Factory was really designed to cheer on players, to encourage players to feel empathy with their own character and emotional investment in their character's success. This kind of empathy can help to induce virtual presence. So as another example of this kind of affirming music, let's check out some gameplay from another of my recent VR projects, the upcoming Babylon Battle Royale. The game is currently in development by Kite and Lightning for VR. Now, confidence is a running theme in the world of Babylon Battle Royale, and that's because the characters in the world of Babylon are coping with a pretty humiliating fact of life. They're babies. They're immortal babies. In the future, trying to assert their dominance and become the epitome of cool. When composing the music for Babylon Battle Royale, I focused on musical styles that would emphasize self-assurance and swagger. So here's some video that Kite and Lightning released of one of their baby characters getting his groove on to some music I composed for Babylon Battle Royale. kind of self-confident music is just all over Babylon Battle Royale, and it serves as a constant reward and encouragement for players, encouraging them to identify with their own character and empathize with their challenges and their successes. This empathy, in turn, fuels the experience of virtual presence. So now we've considered how engagement, engrossment, and empathy can reinforce our psychological attachment to a game. So now let's move on to the third mechanism wherein music enables virtual presence: mood attenuation. Now, as composers, it's important that we maintain a firm grasp of the emotional undercurrents in a game, not only because this can help to increase virtual presence, but also because there are some emotions that can potentially interfere with it. Case in point, in a study published in the journal Presence, computer scientist David Nunes of the University of Cape Town investigated how music influences virtual presence. He directed study subjects to explore a virtual environment while hearing music of differing moods. The music included both positive and negative emotional states. Nunes found that during negative emotions, the sensation of virtual presence dropped. Likewise, during positive emotional states, virtual presence increased. So what does this mean for us as game composers working in virtual reality? Well, it may mean that we should keep a close watch on the overall emotional arc of our scores for virtual reality projects, looking for opportunities to possibly attenuate those emotions if they've grown too dark for too long. For instance, at one point during the Life Hutch VR game, players climb into the cockpit of a fighter ship, and they hurtle into a frantic space battle against a relentless enemy. Now, in discussing musical choices for this battle, the project director and I decided that instead of focusing on the hopeless odds and the desperation, we'd inject a more neutral sense of determination and competence into the music instead. This meant that the space battle provided a break from the surreal mood that colors the rest of the music for the game. So let's see what that was like.
I detect asteroids between us and the Dreadnought. Make a base event. 2 more time in headed our way.
We're taking fire. We're running out of time here.
Warfed. Long-range scanners are showing a new wave of fighters coming. Try to keep them busy. You better take that shot now.
So in this space battle, the music attempts to uplift the player, taking a break from the darker music that colors the rest of the game. Now, this lighter mood helps to increase virtual presence, as shown by the University of Cape Town study. Interjecting lighter breaks into otherwise dark emotional textures can help to attenuate the mood and support virtual presence for players. Now, it's clear that the psychology of virtual presence is tenuous to maintain, and there are also some drawbacks that we're going to have to consider. So let's take a moment to think about one way in which virtual presence itself may possibly hinder player enjoyment and success. Now, have you ever walked into a room and then thought, oh, why did I come in here? What was I going to do? What was I looking for? You stare blankly around yourself for a moment or two, and then, bang, you remember. Oh, that's what I came in here for. Well, that annoying moment of perfect confusion is actually known to psychologists as the event boundary phenomenon, as discovered by psychology professor Gabriel Radvansky of the University of Notre Dame. Now, it seems that as human beings, we tend to organize our memories according to our location. When we move through any kind of passage or doorway leading from one location to the next, our brains decide that we're done with whatever we were thinking about in the previous location. Now that info gets filed away. And when we try to remember it in our current location, it's no longer readily available. When exploring locations in video gaming, well, we never had to worry about event boundary phenomenon because we were just sitting there in front of a screen. But with virtual presence, it's actually possible to get confused when going from place to place, to forget objectives, to wonder what we're doing and why we're doing it, where we're going, how we're getting there. Now that's bad for gameplay and it's bad for players. So how can we counteract this effect? Music actually can go a long way towards helping players. Having music maintain a constant identity while following players through passages and doorways can help keep players focused. In the Scraper First Strike VR shooter from Labradex Studios, players are given missions to accomplish within sprawling skyscrapers that are just chock full of passages and doorways. The music I composed for Scraper First Strike establishes a steady tone and atmosphere that follows players along while they explore, bridging divides and hopefully staving off a bit of the event boundary phenomenon. So let's take a quick look at how that works. So during this type of corridor gameplay in Scraper First Strike, the music maintains a consistent mood, helping to tie locations together and hopefully reducing a bit of the event boundary phenomenon. Virtual presence is an elusive prize, and it's one that VR studios will continue to pursue as development progresses and becomes more sophisticated over time. During this talk, we've taken a look at how music can help to enhance and support the sensation of virtual presence. We've explored what virtual presence is, why it's important in gaming, and we've considered some composition strategies that can help to induce virtual presence. We've discussed flow theory and how flow can help players become more fully engaged in a virtual environment. We've looked at an interesting three-stage model of psychological attachment that can work to enable virtual presence. We've explored how mood attenuation can allow composers to assist players in maintaining their virtual presence. And finally, we've considered that virtual presence itself may introduce some negative gameplay effects in the form of the event boundary phenomenon. And we've conjectured on possible solutions that music can provide to help solve this problem. Now, I hope you found some of these ideas to be interesting, and you'll possibly consider employing them in your own projects. Virtual reality is a bold new frontier in game development, and it offers us brand new creative opportunities. Achieving virtual presence is one of our main goals in our work in VR, but it presents a significant challenge. As game developers, we'll need to employ every trick of science and artistry in order to convince players that they are truly present in an alternate world. And music can be a powerful tool to accomplish that. Thanks very much for coming to my talk today. Thank you. All right, so now we're heading into the Q&A portion. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to step up to the microphone. And don't forget to introduce yourselves. Also, I'm going to be taking more questions in wrap-up room 3024 after this. That's going to be just down the hallway and around the corner. And finally, if everyone could please remember to fill out those session evaluation emails. They're going to be popping into your inboxes in just a few minutes, I think. So, okay, does anyone have a first question? Yes? No? Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm Nathan Whitehead, composer.
Hi, Nathan.
Hi. So regarding mood attenuation, it seems like virtual reality has some cool opportunities for horror games. Have you thought about, and I haven't worked with VR at all, about the mood attenuation concept in horror where you're probably going to have a lot of darkness. And it seems like that could be great for really scary environments, but it's kind of the opposite of maybe keeping more positive colors to keep people engaged.
I know exactly what you mean. It's definitely a conundrum when you're trying to balance the emotional needs of the story you're telling with the comfort level of the players and their ability to kind of identify with their environment. I think one of the things that we can do when we're thinking about ways to emotionally engage players without overwhelming them with darkness is we can break up some of those negative tracks of music with some things that are focused just on the energy level. I talked a little bit about some of the music that I composed for Shattered State, which focused on energy and motivation. And it keeps things moving while also smoothing things out and making them feel a bit neutral at times. Now, you're not brightening the music up. You're not suddenly making, oh, well, this is happy. We're happy to be chased by that monster. But you're still giving a break from the sense of dread that could possibly increase the discomfort level that builds up in players to the point where they start feeling like they want to step back from the reality of the virtual experience they're having. I think that would be a strategy that you could experiment with and see if it feels right for the project you're working on.
Right. Cool. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks. All right. If no one has any more questions, then I'm just going to thank you all very much for coming. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. You were a great audience. Thank you very much.